Nice. Hey everyone, this is the SIG-Auth meeting for July 31st, 2024. Got a pretty decent sized agenda, so I guess we can get started. See, first two topics are mine. So the first one was I saw that we added credential ID, or we're trying to add credential IDs for X509 certs, and we went ahead and added them for our service account tokens that we issue, because we understand the JTI for those. And so that got me thinking about, well, what should we do for custom JOT authenticators that are configured on the API server? So today we don't do anything special. If you use the new authentication config, you can set extra fields using cell expressions in whatever way you want. So for any key, static key that must be like a fully qualified domain, you can set any value you want. So it could just be the random string, it could be a field, whatever. But you can do that. We don't restrict you in any way. But it seems like we could plausibly default to using the JTI claim if it's present. Jordan, you asked, do we protect ourselves in any of the other Kubernetes extras? No, we don't. Um, so that's not great. So what do we think? So I think we got a few dimensions there to figure out, like, what should we do by default? Should defaults be overridable? Um, do we want to tighten validation in any particular way?
I like pulling the JTI claim out and using it consistently with the way we use the JTI claim for service account tokens. I don't think that it should be contentious.
Okay.
Letting you extract a random thing or construct a random thing using cell or like pull it from another claim, I'm way less sure about that. But if we want to start by saying, like, the thing that issued it, if you had used the JTI claim, we surface a standard thing in a standard way, that seems okay to me. I'd like to hear what other people think.
What happens? What happens if someone's already defining it? I can write these already, right?
Yep. You can do whatever. If you use authentication config, which is beta, you can do anything you want using cell expressions for the values. The keys must be statically defined ahead of time.
Okay.
As the string.
I could see warning. I'd probably just warn at this point. Like, this is a super trusted admin. Like, they own their cluster. Warning them, like, you're using authentic, like, Kubernetes IO keys. You probably shouldn't be. Like, those belong to us. If you are, you're sort of out of bounds. Might behave weirdly in the future. But I don't know that I would. Well, I don't know.
Quick question. Other than credential ID, was there something recently we defined that was kind of similar?
I mean, the service account there's a bunch of extra claims around like pod name and UID and node name and UID.
Yeah, I think I would like to. This is still beta, right? Like I would like
Yeah.
to say we control our keys.
Yeah. Like, locking it down until we consider. Yeah, if it's still beta, I think that's probably fair game. Like,
Because
there
it's
may
probably
be
not.
cases where we want to allow saying, like, oh, you can pull identity information out and like put it in the node name field, and maybe that will drive some behavior in the future around like constraining users to nodes. Like, but we should only do it once we consider and explain, like,
Yes.
here's what it does and here's how you drive it, starting by saying, nah, Kubernetes IO and Kits IO claims or user extra info is ours and you can't drive that right now.
I think that's fair. I could see node name being useful in the future, but I would want to intentionally go into that.
Yeah.
Okay. So how, since this is API server config, how do you expect us to tighten this? Would we just update the validation and say, when you start your API server, it's just going to crash loop?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. So in 132, if you were being bad in 131, your server will crash loop and you're going to have to go figure out something else. And in 132, we will now start consuming the standard JTI claim and putting it. Basically, if you have a JTI claim, it is a non-empty string. We will put that in the credential ID.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. So in 132, tighten validation to not allow use of our spaces and defaulting to JTI set is okay. So I think that seems good to me. I don't think we're really going to break anyone. I just not very useful to people to use our namespace. It doesn't give you anything special. So, okay. So I think I'm happy with that. Does anyone else have anything on that topic before we go to the next one?
So I had just one question.
Go ahead, Anish.
So in the comment that you asked about, should we allow the user to override it? Was the thought that we would make JTI like a first-class field in the authentication config, like we do for UID and stuff, and then user would override that with cell expression?
No, this was asking, should you be able to set the authentication credential ID extra info using
So basically,
and
we
by
would.
disallowing that key at all, the answer is no, you can't override.
Right. Yeah, so it wouldn't be first class, but it was like, hey, if we're going to let people set Kubernetes stuff, are they allowed to override the defaults when there is a default? So I think what we're saying is no, if we're ever going to allow them to set Kubernetes stuff, that'll be in a very specific targeted way. We have no such specific thing right now, so you're just not allowed to set anything. And then we will do the defaulting of the JTI if present. But you can't. So there's no way to, if your JOT token contains the JTI, there's no way to not make that show up. I think that's fine. Yeah. Okay. Anybody else?
I guess like if you're going to break the API, why not ban every Kubernetes.io's prefix instead of the specific one?
Oh no, we are going to ban. You won't be able to use any Kubernetes IO or K8s IO keys. It's just that, therefore, we definitely also have banned your ability to set credential ID.
This is sort of adjacent, but Tahir's PR to set the credential ID for X509 certificates. I think we got some feedback that the SHA-256 sum fingerprint was good from Micah. If no one else has objections to that.
I have an internal thread that I need to summarize and paste into that.
Okay.
Basically, I think it's +1. I just need to make sure because I just need to read through it.
Okay, sounds good.
But yes, I think we can definitely get that in 132 without any issue. Okay. Cool. So next topic was mine also, which is so as part of the structured authentication config KEP, I wanted to expand how token caching works. So today, all of our token caching logic is completely oblivious to the actual credential. It's just at the cache layer itself. So we have a default unconfigurable cache for 10 seconds. That's just there to prevent DOS against API server. And then on token webhooks and delegated token auth, you can configure the lifetime of that cache. But it's just purely static. So, you usually got to pick like a small number of minutes because otherwise you just kind of host. With JOT tokens, there's no mechanism to revoke them outside of key rotation. And also the way key rotation works is keys don't get rotated until a new key ID is seen that hasn't been previously seen. So it's even then quite weak. But that part aside, right? Basically today, if we validate a JOT token, we'll only remember it for 10 seconds, even if its TTL was like 5 minutes. But there's not necessarily any reason to redo the crypto validation because it's deterministic. It will either say yes or no, but it's not going to change unless the config changes in some way. So I wanted to make that smarter. And I was curious. I laid out like 3-ish implementation style things about how should the TTL be expressed. Like 2 of them are very much like they're just internal details to like our code. The third approach was more like, hey, should there be like an extra field or something that would make it visible in audit logs? I don't know if that's a good idea. But I was curious if we gave this capability to JOT authenticators, should we also give it to token webhooks? It seems like we should, because token webhooks are supposed to be sort of the most powerful, most configurable thing. It'd be kind of awkward for JOT authenticators to have capabilities that the token webhooks don't. It all doesn't have to happen at once, but I'll stop there and see what thoughts folks have.
Isn't token expiry time itself, like if it's like a JWT, it has an expiry time, right? So that itself imposes an upper limit on how long the token can stay valid. Would that not be enough?
So in a simplistic sense, yeah, that's totally fine. I think we do have to consider like maximum cache size. I don't think we want, if you have a ton of disparate tokens, each lasting like multiple days or weeks or something, that wouldn't, I don't think, be great. And we do, I think, need to consider what to do when keys rotate on the authenticator, because if it was validated with a different key, it may not be valid anymore. But yes, I think that's the important part about JOT tokens is they do actually tell you within the token in a defined field when they will expire. We just completely ignore it and say, I will remember you for 10 seconds because that's basically guaranteed to be true. But after that, we'll redo the crypto again for no really good reason other than your cache has to be a lot smarter.
In the scenario where the key ID that was used for the token is revoked, at least the current version of the Go OIDC library that we use has some kind of cache control, right? Like even if the key ID that is used exists, it would still say the cache is expired and go fetch it from the JOX endpoint to see what the new key set is. Do we have to worry about that scenario in this caching case?
I'm trying to remember if you encounter a new key ID, but the cache control header told you that the key set was valid for like, I don't know, 10 days, and you were still in the middle of those 10 days. Do we go fetch? I can't remember if we fetch on a key ID miss, or do we just say, the cache is still valid and I don't know the key, therefore the token is invalid. I don't remember. It's really funky.
Yeah. look at them.
In general, we would have to define more concretely what are the semantics of cache invalidation, both in terms of the general sense, but also the more dynamic sense of keys are changing. With 10-second caches, you don't have to really worry about this because it's just so tiny that it's irrelevant. But if you have long-lived caches, I think it's much more relevant.
Right. We have a layered cache today. So the very top level is the 10-second. Like any token, we won't repeat the same authentication check for 10 seconds. So service account token, JOT token, remote token, like whatever it is, that comes back and is like, yep, you are this user. It's like, cool, I'll remember that for 10 seconds. Then within a particular authenticator, like the webhook authenticator, it has sort of its own TTLs, positive and negative TTLs. So I think if we were going to do something like this, following that same layered approach, so that the top level cache would still be like, all right, 10 seconds, whatever. If I'm out of the top level thing, now I'll call down into the JOT authenticator. The JOT authenticator no longer has to treat the token as opaque. It can actually see like, oh, you say you're from this key ID. Is that still in my set? You say your expiration date is still here. Like, I think whatever we do here, if we do something here, it would be like that same layered approach where we don't have to treat it as opaque, and the JOT authenticator has knowledge of what key IDs are still valid, and it has better knowledge there. I'm not sure about exposing this out to token webhook. I'm trying to think what that means.
It would mean you do a token review, and not only would it say if it's authenticated or not, but it would say, hey, this credential expires at this Unix timestamp. And the same way that JOTs tell you that expires at this Unix timestamp, granularity to second. And then you could choose how long to cache it, but you should not cache the result for longer than that value. I think I'm okay.
Yeah, maybe something in token review status that says like, how long is this result good for? Both positive and negative, I guess. I don't know.
What would be the basis for a negative? So positive, I could get. You might be able to interpret on the webhook, this is not going to be good after this time. If you fail validation, how would you intelligently set?
I think maybe if your token webhook internally has a cache of like valid keys or something that it uses for token verification, it could set the negative time for a failed hit to the end of that cache lifetime, saying that, well, maybe the next time I refresh my cache, I'll be able to verify this token. But right now,
okay, that's a good point. Hadn't thought of that.
Like knowing that we use the token review API for aggregated API servers to ship tokens back to Cube API server to say like, is this a valid token for the surface? If we add smart things to the JOT authenticator to say like, oh, we can actually cache this for longer, or if we don't let that be expressed back out to token review, those tokens won't get the benefit of that.
They only get benefit at the API server hop, but they won't get benefit at their network hop. So they will.
But is TTL sufficient? Okay, so if we're saying it's going to be a layered thing, and internally the JOT authenticator is going to know like, not only is the expiration on the token good, but also my verifying keys haven't changed. Therefore, I can actually use this cache entry. You can't translate that into a single timestamp, like just put the token expiry and send that back to the delegated API server, aggregated API server, and say like, yep, never to contact me again because this token's good for like a month. Like you lose the ability to invalidate if your signing keys validate. So I'm not actually sure that if we're going to consider anything other than just the token expiry, that we should send the timestamp back to the aggregated server.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think what you're saying is while it might make sense for a token webhook on API server to tell us information, because token review is exposed on the API server itself for other consumers, a simple TTL is insufficient in describing cache invalidation semantics. It can only tell you like the best case scenario, which could theoretically cause you to cache something for much longer than you should, because there's no out of band thing saying, hey, this is how you know it's revoked.
So maybe it still makes sense for things Kube API servers calling out to. I don't think it makes sense for the JOT authenticator to send timestamps back out to aggregated servers. So I'm sort of on the fence for whether we need to add it to token review. I don't think we should add it and have JOT authenticators send timestamps back out. Yeah.
Okay. Would we be okay with at least starting conservatively and saying, okay, we're not going to do token review for basically the fact that we can't actually make it symmetric. And maybe
I guess I would ask, like, how much does it save us if, like, all the bookkeeping to have another layered cache and tie it to key invalidation? Like, how much does it save us over just redoing the crypto? I don't know.
I mean, we can certainly benchmark it. I think the map lookup should be really fast in comparison.
Okay. If it's internal only and it's JOT only and it like marries the expiry on the token, and then we invalidate based on cache size or key rotation, like if we get it right and it's not too complex, it doesn't bother me, and it saves us like significant amounts of computation, I guess I'm not opposed to it. If we don't expose it, it makes it easier to, like in token review, it makes it easier to have a sort of speculative PR and see how the complexity is and how much the savings is, and decide if it's worth it. We should at least be able to answer questions about how key invalidation work. The fact that we don't even really know how our own implementation works.
I mean, to be fair, I've had to deal with V3 and V2 of Go OIDC for many years, and so they kind of have blurred in my mind and no longer clear to me what it does. It doesn't do what I wanted to do, I can tell you that. It does something else.
Yeah, I think with V3, it's only when it sees a key ID that's not present in its memory, then it'll go and say, I'll go fetch it. But V2 still has better controls, which is why we're still staying at that version.
Yeah.
Okay.
Keeping it internal to it. Okay. Let's see. Does this sort of cover what you said, Jordan? So if we can keep the complexity of implementation not too bad, and benchmarks show promise for improvements, and it should be okay to keep it internal to the JOT authenticator in whatever sense makes sense there. We can obviously honor key ID rotation and the expiration claim. That would mean that we would not do token review or token webhooks in any way. So basically, it doesn't touch any other authenticator.
It doesn't touch anything. It doesn't touch the interface. It doesn't touch token review. It's basically the same as the webhook today has an internal positive and negative TTL. So this would be internal to the JOT authenticator. Like it would manage its own cache, and it doesn't have to treat the tokens as opaque. Starting there seems plausible. If someone can present a compelling reason why token webhooks should have the power also, we could think about it. That would obviously require API changes and interface changes to plumb that through more layers.
Right. Dave, do you agree with that? Does that feel like an okay?
Yeah. And a result of that would be no configuration exposed, which I think for what you want to do, you'd be okay with. So
Yeah, I just don't want to do a bunch of crypto for things I just already validated.
Yeah. Just remember there is that threshold of needs to be easy to read.
Yep. Okay, so I think I'm happy with that. Unless anyone has any other comments, then we can go to more fine-grained kubelet API. Let's see if we want to chat about that real quick. Are we on the call here?
Sorry, yeah, I am. I think I looked away for a second. Um, so yeah, this is, I'm a little frustrated now that I just started focusing on the meeting. Yeah, so this was an issue that I think Tim Allclair opened a while back, and I was like looking at it and thought of like I thought it was a good problem to tackle, and so I talked to Jordan about it a bit and kind of scoped it down and wrote a proposal. So I'd love people's thoughts, but the LDR is that like here, some of the sub resources like proxy have a lot of permissions that can be moved out, and so two that we thought can be like moved out to a separate sub resource would be healthy and pods because they're both read only, and then in the case where you want to like look at all the pods or do healthy for the kubelet API, also getting the exec permission kind of seems getting the ability to exec seems undesirable, and so the idea is to kind of first check with the healthy sub resource, and then if that fails, fall back to like proxy so that like we're backward compatible. And then since kubelet subject access reviews have a cache, so it would be expensive the first time, but not like always. So just wondering if people are, if that sounds good, we can take it forward. Otherwise, happy to.
One question I had that wasn't me, because I think I've kind of forgotten some of the layering of this is there's not an example in the KEP of like, I don't know, like using client Go to make one of these calls. So is this the flow in which you go to API server to get to kubelet, or is this direct kubelet?
This is direct kubelet with
Direct kubelet, yeah.
Yeah, if you go to API server, I some time ago I had like raised another issue, which is that the authorization check made if you go via API server to a kubelet is always node/proxy, regardless of what kubelet subresources we're accessing. But yeah, this is only an issue if you're connecting to kubelet directly.
Okay, so this is not doing kubelet proxy through API server. This is
No.
just on kubelet. Okay, and then can somebody remind me exactly how does a pod get access to endpoints on the kubelet? Like, do you have to do host network?
No, you don't. You just need to know the pod IP address, connect to 10250. Typically, the configuration, like the expected configuration is that there's a webhook token authenticator that talks to Kube API server and authorizer that also webhooks to Kube API server. You might also have a X509 certificate authenticator. So connect to kubelet. Yeah.
It technically comes down, like you can pick which interface kubelet serves on, right? So you could limit it to host network if you wanted to, but in most cases, I think kubelet just serves on all interfaces.
Yeah, you can't. I mean, I guess the question was like, how does the request path translate to like a mapped user ID and privileges, right?
Right now, what I'm trying to figure out is if I'm in a pod and I want to talk to this guy, I know this is the port, What is the host name of the request?
It would be the node name, right? Or node address.
How do I know the node name or the node address?
It's probably since that pod needs to talk to the node, you have injected it via like a downward API or an environment variable call.
Okay. And is it HTTP or HTTPS?
HTTPS.
Okay. And where does the CA bundle come from?
It's configured to kubelet. The kubelet's certificate authority, server certificate authority is the same as the API servers.
I highly doubt that's required.
It's not required, but typically, if it is the case, then you don't need any other information than like a standard like service account token and CSR.
Okay. So I'm assuming that lots of people make bad assumptions about the CA bundle.
Probably, yeah, definitely.
Okay.
If we are not validating it, then then it's something people are doing.
We lose both David and Jordan. Wonderful.
So whatever you say goes, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, see, they're both local to me, so they can both physically hurt me if they.
I think we're all local, right? At least in our
just need
this group.
plane. Okay. All right. So that seems. I think then I would ask the question of. Is this the most desired thing to fix, or should we fix the fact that you have no granularity when you proxy through API server?
Both are desirable, but this is probably more desirable to fix in the short term. The one that Vinayak raised.
And the issue is that in order to grant something local to the node access to the kubelet API, you end up granting it proxy permission. Right?
No, it's more like not all sub-resources have their own, not all kubelet endpoints have their own sub-resource. So pods is just proxy, even though a pod maps to proxy on RBAC, even though pods is a read-only API, which is a listing of pods as kubelet sees them.
Oh, that too, right? So yes, you get the privilege spread even locally, just like assuming no API access, like you get the privilege spread.
The other question I would have is there anything we can do here to make it so that this is node scope? Right? So it would be very odd for a kubelet to see a request to these resources from a account that wasn't running on it.
Yes, we should do that in addition to this, I guess. But like this kind of solves the spread problem, but this is like that would be an additional control.
Yeah, where do we do that? Custom authorizer.
I mean, so in authentication, right, you can see when you do token review, you can see who's calling you and you can see what node it's bound to.
Oh, just have kubelet do that.
Yeah, kubelet should require like a separate audience. Like it should not accept API server as an audience.
That's in here. But sometimes you do have cross-node requests, right? Like you have some people might have a metric scraper on one node that's scraping a bunch of other nodes.
Yeah, so I think so. Then I would ask two questions, right? Should this stuff be audience scoped to kubelets, and what is the audience? And then should this at least have the capability of being node scoped, and how is that expressed? Because right now, I think when you, for example, if we scroll down to RBAC permissions, right? If you grant this capability or some subset of it to a workload, you're saying that any instance of that workload on any kubelet can call any other kubelet.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely possible to node scope it somehow. Like you have the node claim and tokens, and the kubelet knows which node it is, so it should be pretty straightforward. It's just a
Yeah.
question, I think, of where to put that option.
Yeah, we can do that with a custom authorizer, right? Like, so we can say, especially with a node binding, like the node extra info in the token, we can say, yeah, this should have been nodes. Like, this is the wrong node.
There's a number
Reject
of
it.
different options, right? That
Yeah.
being one. Kubelet, like it being a bit flip on kubelet, where like you just say the whole node like becomes node scoped. Like some annotation on the RBAC that kubelet respects for specific service accounts. Different options. I think that would all be up for discussion. Probably shouldn't walk up.
Coming back to I think Vinayak's proposal is more about authorization. Obviously, we have authentication issues to fix as well, but like maybe we can focus on this and like have other proposals for the authentication issues as separate steps.
Yeah, I mean, at a bare minimum, though, I think those need to be discussed and declared officially out of scope, not just we'll do it later.
Yeah. Yeah,
that makes sense. Yeah.
I think I agree with that. I think that's a good point, more broad, and then we can add that to the proposal and say like why we aren't tackling that now and what the future of this would look like. The other thing that I think I forgot to push the commits for, so if anybody is looking at it, was should this be an opt-in for kubelet? Because kubelet has this like kubelet config, which is in v1 beta 1, which has like some webhook. I think it's like webhook config, kubelet webhook auth config, which has like some settings for TTLs for the caches. And could we add something like a mode there saying like, hey, like opt in this mode, and then that setting can only be exposed when the feature gate is enabled? Or I was wondering because like initially I wrote the proposal that way, but then I was like, why wouldn't somebody want to enable a more finer grained thing which supports the coarse grained thing already as a fallback? And so adding that extra setting kind of, yeah, it makes it easy to roll out, but it also kind of, if you don't opt in, then you don't get this thing, which is basically free because it's like only the first call would be an extra subject.
Yeah, I mean, my gut says just having a feature gate is probably sufficient as it gets promoted to beta and GA, it will just become the default. I think that's probably fine. But we can I think probably discuss that on the Kep and Maths Signal folks if they have any other patterns they've followed. I'm not immediately seeing a rationale for it being a capability that can be disabled once GA.
Yeah. Okay, I'll add a section under discussion, I guess, and then we can tackle that there.
Yeah, and I'm not really worried about like extra token reviews or extra subject access reviews. Those are very cheap.
Okay, cool. And the final thing was that so there was this recent feature which was about checkpointing, which is also like a new kubelet API, but that permission is spread out into a separate permission. So like it's a separate sub-resource. It's not under the proxy sub-resource, the ability to do that. But it is not under system kubelet API admin. That permission does, like that sub-resource is not granted. So anybody who has that role cannot do checkpointing. And I was wondering why that is that way.
I would ask SIG-Node folks. There might be a specific rationale. I could as easily see that they just forgot that this cluster role existed and therefore they forgot to update it.
Yeah, it sounds like an oversight to me because without this Kube API server in the kind of default configuration, cannot proxy to the node's checkpoint command successfully. Like it would always fail. Right?
Yeah, like having looked at the design for that feature, like the actual team that's like doing it, they have some agent that directly interacts with the kubelet API. And so I think they forgot about the scenario of like Kube PI server, like having this permission outside of like using proxy to do that, basically, like going through QAPI server to do that. So okay, cool. I just wanted to see if anybody here knew that. Okay, I'll follow up on that as well. Cool. That covers my concerns. Please leave your comments on the cap. Thanks so much for your time.
Okay. Anyone else have any feedback on this one before we go to Dan's doc? Okay. Hey Dan, what do you have for us today?
So I missed the last meeting where Surya presented this to everybody. So I read the minutes, but I don't know exactly what the objections were. But so you'd asked her to write this, and this is sort of the quick summary of what we're doing. But basically, for reasons totally unrelated to the PSA stuff, we're redoing TCP and HTTP probes in pod. And because there are security problems associated with the host field and there's no easy fix for it, and it's not a super like necessary feature anyway, we're planning to just get rid of it in the new version of the probes. And so the question is, well, what do we do with the ones in the deprecated version since we can't actually get rid of it? So we were going to use pod security admission so that people could just block people from using that field to avoid the security problems.
I'm trying to remember the previous discussion. I think what Jordan had said around, like, because David had asked the question of how we're gonna actually build this out, and I think Jordan wanted to lean in on the versioning capability within PSA. So, like in 132, the 132 PSA policy would have a slight extra check that would, I don't know, baseline or restricted. I don't know which profile it would be on, but it would prevent this field from being set, right? And so if an admin user was very security conscious and they had set their policy to latest, pods that didn't meet this criteria would no longer run in those buckets. And then otherwise they would run if they were using an old version. I think what was said. Rita, anybody else from last time, do y'all remember anything different?
I think
Liga said that.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, that Liga also said use their versioning to gate it, basically.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember though. Was there like a specific set of next steps? Maybe I'll go back and look at the notes. I just can't remember if there
I think
was.
the next step was to create a cap, and this doc was to help pre-discussions before the cap, I guess.
Or to see if we even need the cap, or if people are like, oh yeah,
Right,
he has a PR to implement it. So the question is, I think there was concern about upgrades, and our answer there is, one, not many people are using it, and the ones who are can move to use exec probes if they really need to. Just have an exec probe that calls curl on whatever they used to be doing a host probe of.
Yeah, so my reading of the notes, and I think what I'm remembering is, I think Jordan, pretty strongly wanted to keep just a very small one that basically would describe basically what you have here, and I think the PRR questions would sort of force you to answer all the upgrade scenarios. And I think it would be pretty straightforward. It might actually be small enough for it to be declared beta when it starts. It's a little awkward to talk about these things in alpha, beta, and GA when the version capability of PSA sort of does what you want anyway.
Right.
I'm like one of the confusions was, are we going to lean into feature gates or are we going to lean into the versions? And I think we agreed, no, we're going to lean into the versions. But what that doesn't tell me is there ever going to be a feature gate like when it's like alpha? I don't know. But I think that's the pieces that we have to sort of agree on in the cap. But I do think it'd be very short. Like, I think it would just describe the new policy, if it's on baseline or restricted, and what do upgrades look like.
Basically, the PRR would be the bulk of the cap.
Yes, it is basically who are you breaking and why, which is what kind of PRR is about anyway. But yeah, I think that's fine, and I suspect we can just put that into 132.
Okay.
Anybody else have thoughts, feedback?
Is this going to be baseline? Sorry, I haven't looked at the proposal yet.
I don't know. That was not clear to me, or I didn't remember any specific discussion. So I think that's one of the things that.
So in my discussions with Jordan, I think the idea of baseline is usually to prevent like host access, and so this falls under that, right? And so I very strongly want this to be baseline. I think because it falls exactly under the category of things that we block under baseline. So.
It's been so long. I'm trying to like remember the difference between restricted and baseline. But are you saying that if a pod today runs under baseline, it should not be able to set this field?
Yes.
Okay. So okay.
So the PR that we have already does use baseline.
Okay. So what that would mean is if you wanted to use this field in the future, you would have to run under privileged PSC.
But also you would be using a deprecated API because we're not even going to put the host field into the new and improved API. So
yeah, I mean that's fine. So okay, I think that's agreeable. I can see why we would not want either restricted or baseline to allow this to happen. It doesn't seem sound for either one of those profiles.
And there is another mechanism that exists, right? The exec stuff, the exec stuff. Or is that also being blocked?
No, the exec probes will still exist. So, but in that case, the admin could use network policy to block them from being able to, contact random hosts, which they can't do with the host field of the existing probes.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Okay. So I think that's good. Yeah, that seems fine to me. Anything else, Phil?
Okay. I think that's it.
Okay. I think I'm so next time, so in 2 weeks from now, we're gonna do the KEP planning for 132. So I think anyone that wants a KEP in there can go like add a comment or whatever into the doc so we remember to add it. And I think next Monday during triage meeting, we'll probably go over and get this doc updated and ready for 132 as we did in the past. I think this one will require Jordan to look at it since PSA is kind of his baby. And this one we will need at least one person from SIG-Node because it is a kubelet API or kubelet changes.
Cool. Sounds good.
Yeah, so I think what we want to make sure is we have a lead from SIG-Node lined up for this. Otherwise,
yeah, I'm talking to Sergey on SIG-Node about this, so I'll make sure that they're in the reviewer and approver for the KEP.
Okay.
Thank you.
There you go. Otherwise, I think we can have 5 minutes back. Folks want that time. Cool. All right, we'll see y'all in 2 weeks then. Bye. Take care.